I'm Luke Kennedy with the McCain Institute, and you're in the arena with leaders and citizens who are taking character-based action. So I had the chance to sit down with Tara Sonenshine, and I really think you're going to be interested in what she has to say, and not just because she was a former Emmy Award winning news producer for ABC, or Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, or Senior Communications Counselor to the President. I think it's her inspiration on getting into these arenas of news and business and public service, and her global views and activity you'll be most interested in, as well as her current work at George Washington University. So we're in the arena with Tara Sonenshine, and we really appreciate you joining us here today.
Happy to be here.
And in some ways, you're really easy to describe, and in other ways, probably kind of difficult to describe. I see where you've been top strategic communications counselor to presidents, and in the State Department run all of public affairs and diplomacy. This after an amazing career in journalism. And now you're working with George Washington University and young people and strategy and a whole lot more. So that's kind of what comes to mind, but I bet you I'm leaving a heck of a lot of things out. But I thought maybe the start point could be a phrase I've familiar with in the past is called gamekeeper turned poacher. Have you heard that?
I have heard that expression.
Hopefully our listeners have heard that. And what I take that to mean is when somebody's kind of doing one career and it's really almost a 180 degree change. Now, you're Emmy Award winning news editor for years. It took you around the world. I don't want to get into some of that. But the turn poacher part is then you decided to take that really into government. And that's what I would like to propose as our start point.
Well, the podium, I'm here in the arena, but in every arena there's somewhat of a podium. And in the field of foreign policy and media, there is a divide, if you will, a podium that stands between it. And yes, indeed, I crossed over from one side of the podium to the other. I began my career in journalism, and with deep, deep curiosity about the world. And what a great opportunity to go into media at a time in the 1980s and early 1990s when the world was changing, and to get to cover the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Cold War thawing, Tiananmen Square, and lots of opportunities to produce news, the release of Nelson Mandela. So lots of really unique times to go to Iran and Cuba and South Africa and China, and then to find myself with an opportunity to take all that media knowledge and serve a president and go from being the one hounding officials to be the one doling out information to officials gave me a sense of that game-changing arena.
And, this kind of backing up, this interest in things abroad and global, that started young, right? I mean, and propelled you, it sounds like.
Well, when you're born a grandchild of immigrants who came to Ellis Island from what was called White Russia and from Lithuania, and when you grow up in a household where the language you hear is not English from your grandparents. In my case, there was a little Russian and a lot of Yiddish. And that instills you with a curiosity. Where did they come from? What is this ship they came on to, this Statue of Liberty? And anyone who's been in that situation knows that the grandparents don't tell you much. They've escaped pogroms. They've left a world, and they don't want to talk about the old country. So I was quite intrigued going into college with this notion of international affairs.
So, well, maybe I am jumping around here a little bit, but you're at the McCain Institute, and we're focused on character-driven leadership and how character and courage really factor into leadership and civic action. And I think kind of what comes to mind to me when I say that is, you saw that firsthand, right? And then you had a chance to act on that. When you go, well, certainly to counsel a president, but also to the State Department, it's where we're talking about these things. Well, I'll back up. Not exactly starting again, but Senator McCain would say our values are our interests, and our interests are our values. At home and abroad, and things that have to be defended with courage and character. But you were in a position to put that into motion. It's one thing for someone like me to kind of understand the power of that and talk about it, and certainly Senator McCain did, but you had to wrestle with that in very interesting ways, because what does that mean when you talk about messaging and how things, play out?
Well, there's an intersection between public affairs and diplomacy. And particularly in a world surrounded by information technology and citizen engagement, it's not only about what you say as an individual, but what you say as a government. So my career in government was really focused on the public messaging. What is it the president or the Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor is communicating to the world about our values, our interests, and our policies? And words matter. So if you want your nation to be a nation of courage, confidence, clearly grounded and rooted in its values of freedom and tolerance, of multi-diverse societies, the power of an individual to reach his or her God-given potential. If those are the values that shape your policies, your messages need to reflect that confidence, that courage, that clear-mindedness, that sense of who we are as a nation and what our leadership position in the world is. And for me, the messaging, the public affairs, the public diplomacy, the public face of policy is so critical.
So that's day to day with consistency, as, and it's not all about leaders, but primarily as senior leaders are going about their way, and as issues come up and as agendas get advanced. What examples come to mind? Probably thousands, but one or two.
Example come to mind for me are women and foreign policy. It's taken us a while in our country, from going back 100 years to women getting the vote, to women rising to positions of leadership. But once you have women secretaries of state, women national security advisors, we don't yet have a woman president or vice president, but once you have women in leadership powers, I was very excited to work with those women to help women around the world who needed to be lifted up, to find their voices, to get away from gender-based violence. So to be able to go out and talk to women across continents about how to find their voice and to see America as a place that could help lift up that spirit, that to me is an example that ran through my time and continues to animate my work with young women professionals in letting them find their leadership.
Well, that's something I want to pick up on. And before we began taping, I shared with you that yesterday I was in New York with our next generation leaders, 5 of 8 of whom are women, and just amazing to me what they've done and what they're going on to do. And one of our next generation leaders from last year has just become the Minister of Health in Latvia, for example. And there's just so many exciting things happening on that front. And I'm learning a lot, to be quite honest. And you're in more of an academic environment now, working with those that have already done a lot and in grad school and are looking to go forward. Give us a little sense of that, and hopefully some optimism.
Well, the International Affairs program at the Elliott School of International Affairs draws women and men from the United States and overseas. So I get to see women coming from China and women coming from Russia and women coming from South Korea and women coming from Ghana. And they have to both learn American life, they have to learn Washington, and they have to learn the skills that are going to enable them to do work in their spheres. So I really get a chance to see their leadership trajectory as they intern and work in the city, and learn how to navigate. In terms of my U.S. students, I see many who want to go into the Foreign Service or work in the intelligence community or for the FBI or for the World Bank or for an NGO or humanitarian relief. So I see the young leaders who want to change the world in positive ways. They want to contribute to reducing health problems. They want to alleviate poverty. They want to deal with conflict. These are the people who are going to make our global communities safer. And what greater mission in life than to take my experiences at Brookings, United States Institute of Peace, State Department, ABC News.
See, I knew I'd sold you short there.
No, but to take all that experience and be able to help a young person navigate these very complex times and difficulties.
Well, complex times. I don't think, if there's somebody out there that's listening and doesn't agree that it's complex times, I think we'd both like to talk to them. And, First Amendment, and then, press freedom is near and dear to me, and I know to you, and there's, of course, a lot more in there to the First Amendment. How do you think your students, both domestic and international, how caught up are they to the First Amendment?
My students are very caught up with freedom generally, and many freedom of the press. They're all journalists in a matter of speaking. Anyone who's researching, writing, blogging, tweeting has really joined, in a sense, the citizen media, and they know how important reporting is. They do their research papers and their capstone projects, and they rely very often on people who are out on the ground reporting. So we have to protect our flow of information. Without open societies, we are closed, dark, vulnerable, violent places. The light comes with news and information, and we have to safeguard our ability to deliver ground truth where we can, particularly in a very crazy news environment.
So maybe ask you to put your public diplomacy hat on here for a second then. It's great to hear that students, journalists want to study journalism and international affairs and are very tuned in. What about as you broaden that out? Do you think that's as true? And what more do you think we can do to make it more true?
I do worry about the repression of governments around the world when it comes to media. We only have to look at statistics from the committee or other groups out there to know that journalists are harassed, imprisoned, denied rights, unable to tell stories. And I think we have to fight that and make sure that we are really on the side of those struggling in radio, television, newspapers, online. We think that the whole world is gone digital, but there are many parts of the world where old-fashioned radio is still an important medium. And
right.
I believe strongly in our Voice of America and in our public broadcasting, and we have to fight now on many different fronts, but certainly the media front is a key window. It is the portal onto what is happening everywhere.
And we could talk social media, and I'm certainly happy to do that. But a little bit what's on my mind is, following on from press freedom. Pretty commonly accepted now that any organization, any company really probably ought to think of themselves as a media company or a content. I'm sure there are examples where that's not so true, but it sure seems pretty true. This contrasted against, well, we just, we're sitting here just a few days after Johns Hopkins has bought up the museum, which is interesting on a lot of different levels. So it's a very confused landscape to do with media. More content, more messages bombarding us at any given day, but maybe certainly less local news. What do you think about that?
I think we go back to some tried and tested principles. Sourcing. We have to have good sources. We have to have more than one source. We have to distinguish between opinion and analysis, whether it's a think tank or an op-ed page editor. We have to be clear with our audience. There's a burden now on our audience as consumers to differentiate. There are no longer 3 or 4 networks. In the time I came, CNN was just coming into the fore. So we're asking a lot of the viewers, users, readers, listeners. We're asking them to make choices and intelligent choices. And we, as the editors and gatekeepers, have to make choices. So
Right.
I think some of this now is making sure people are up to speed on quality, not just speed, and distinguishing, is this a tweet from somebody I agree with, I believe is correct, and I think that's the onus is on all of us.
So news literacy and responsibility as we consume news. Do you have thoughts on, you hear some say, well, most people seem to accept that, but that the bigger purveyors out there, maybe we will end up talking a little about social media, or increasingly aggregating and have a big say of what kind of comes across our screens more than anywhere else. I love your point about radio, because I don't think we think about that enough, but maybe they have a responsibility as well, or they're kind of learning what the responsibilities are.
Well, the economics drive a lot of journalism and media and information today. And I think where people have to begin to really focus on is the shakeouts that is occurring in big news organizations, from BuzzFeed to all across the board, as we move from this transition of what we used to think of as stringers to people who are just out there writing. And how are we going to pay? What kind of subscription walls and content walls are erected? And what is Facebook? Is it a news site or an information pipeline or a platform? So vocabulary is going to matter in some of this. And we're in a major shakeout phase now of understanding traditional media that has gravitated to social media, and what we think of as critical to our lives, these phones that we cannot live with and cannot live without, the ubiquity of information. And this is going to be a process of peeling back the layers and going back to some core principles where we began. Courage, the courage to seek the truth, tell the truth, find the truth, report the truth. Confidence, the ability to know that you can make a difference. Training and skills. Do I have what it takes to succeed in a career? And mentorship, the kinds of things you do with Next Gen, being able to help people see their progression, keep moving, keep advancing. And it will take leadership, mentorship, training, skill building, and expertise and experience that you're willing to translate to the next generation for us to keep on moving.
You said earlier, words matter, relationships matter. Hopefully you'll entertain this question. I would imagine when you were running all of public affairs and diplomacy for the State Department, you got a pretty good briefing about what was happening around the world. Now you're not in government. How do you keep up with what's going on around the world?
Well, firstly, I'm a big fan of a certain number of publications. The Economist and the BBC, to me, are my personal ones. I tell every one of my students to read The Economist. So one is to find good material to keep up on things. I do look at all the things that are online and keep up with people who are in government and what they have to say, and people outside. I think think tanks and institutes have become central to understanding what's happening. Conferences, panels, discussions, we're in the center of it here. And I think human interaction. I think there is nothing quite like having dinner or a student cafe and really just talking and listening. One thing I will remind people that Ted Koppel taught me years ago, who was the anchor of Nightline. He said, it's not how good is my question, it's how did I listen to the answer? And therein lies the secret sauce. Did I hear you? Did you say something that should make me drop my next question and travel a byroad with you? Or am I so set on getting through my 10 questions that I never heard the 10 answers?
I think by that standard, most everything you've told me today has made me think, wow, there's another different question to ask than what I initially thought. But we do have kind of a standing last question. You've pretty much just answered it, but I suspect you'll have something else to add. And it's advice, typically aimed at folks following in your footsteps to get into the arena, or maybe they've already gotten into the arena but want to kind of know how to really take it forward.
Networking is sometimes a dirty word, so I tell people if you don't like the word networking, call it community building, call it relationship building, but you must have a community and a network. Unfortunately, the volume of people, the ease with which you can push a button and apply, the numbers of scholarships and fellowships, internships, jobs. So knowing people is an important skill. The second, which I mentioned, is keeping your eyes open, your ears open. Don't hunker down in your computer by yourself. Be out there engaging. And the last thing is be curious. Where we began our podcast is about those grandparents that made me curious, made me wonder what their story was. Storytelling and curiosity will get people very far in life and towards whatever success is for that individual.
Tara, thank you for being in the arena, and we look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much.
This podcast is produced by Patrick McCann and Justin Kessler. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, tell your friends, or leave a review.